And it is to the benighted territory of the Middle East that we return this morning, perhaps inevitably after the extraordinary intervention of the Foreign Secretary David Lammy earlier this week. Perhaps not extraordinary. Some would say overdue. Some would perhaps fail to understand the difference between being in power and being in opposition, and the often futile nature of symbolic gestures. Whether or not this turns out to be more substantive or more meaningful, only time will tell. But it has as much to do with the domestic political situation in Israel as it does with the sort of expiry of international patience, because the game is changing there very much in the moment. It does leave us in the strange position of, and not for the first time on this programme, of having explained in some detail why what is happening now would happen, even as many people lobbed all sorts of insults and abuse at those of us who could see absolutely clearly that the notion of international support and indeed domestic support for Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign of, murdering babies, to quote a very interesting figure, who I will tell you about shortly, could only really have one ending in the context of international public discourse. What the ending will be in the context of the people on the ground, the ones still alive, I do not know. You do not know. Nobody knows. It is obvious that the Hamas attack upon Israel on October the 7th, 2023 was unconscionable, egregious, hideous, horrible. But so are many of the things that have happened since, visited upon the people of Gaza by the Israeli government. And I think the problem this morning is that the forces against which the world is now turning do not seem capable of reflection or change. How much of that is down to the internal arithmetic of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, in other words, the coalition he needs to sustain to retain power and quite possibly to retain his own personal liberty, and how much is down to dreams of a greater Israel or ideological commitment to various, relatively hideous ideas of the future, again, we do not know. But before we turn to David Lammy, I want first to tell you about an Israeli politician, not currently a member of the Knesset, but essentially the de facto leader of the opposition, the head of Israel's Labour Party. He is called Yair Golan, and he said yesterday the war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. But I'm going to warn you in advance that if I said this without attributing to it, my inbox would fill up with accusations of anti-Semitism and sympathies for Hamas. But this is the leader of a major political party in Israel speaking, just as Kenneth Roth, the former head of Human Rights Watch, is the Jewish son of a Holocaust survivor and the one who explained to me in the clearest terms why he prefers to use the word genocide now to describe what has happened in Israel. The war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. Actually, no, I've got another aside for you. You think about how obvious everything I'm about to tell you is, and then you just reflect for a moment upon the effort that has been put into trying to keep voices like this silent. The effort that has been put into trying to cancel, insult, abuse, malign, libel, slander anybody suggesting that Israel had reached a point of indefensible conduct some time ago. Not in the immediate aftermath of the October attacks, of course, but at some point afterwards. So this is Yair Golan, the head of Israeli Labour. The war began as a strong and determined reaction to Hamas's heinous attack. But what started as a just operation to defend Israel's security and release the hostages has morphed under the direction of this failed government into a purposeless and senseless war. It has nothing to do with the release of the hostages, as they could already be released through a ceasefire agreement. That's not an opinion, by the way, that's counting. Nor with defeating Hamas, as Hamas could have been defeated long ago through diplomatic action, creating a moderate Sunni alternative through a regional coalition. This project would strengthen Israel's security far better than anything we see now. We have been silent and appeased the ultra-right extremists for too long, and as a result we lost our spine and reached this unprecedented crisis. We cannot be timid or silent when ministers in this government openly celebrate death and starvation. Our mission is to protect Israel's character, to ensure it is a country that doesn't kill children as a hobby or as a policy. As you can imagine, there was a pretty strong reaction to his words. A lot of people choosing, as is normal in these circumstances, to pick up on his use of the word hobby, to attack him for that, to play the game of semantics rather than the moral heft of what he is saying. He goes on, a government that states it is acceptable to starve and kill children is a government that sounds like a spokesperson of Hamas. And it's not just governments, of course. I have spoken to people, let alone read out messages from people who are also entirely comfortable with the idea that it is acceptable to starve and kill children. You may have heard some yourself on LBC, not just on this programme, but on pretty much all of them. They're a little reluctant to go there, but it becomes pretty clear that there's nowhere left to go if they're correctly questioned, which of course is not always the case. A government that talks about dropping nuclear bombs on Gaza is not a Jewish government, certainly not a Zionist one. A government that some of its members refer to October the 7th as a miracle because it supports their wider occupation fantasies is a government that despises the people of Israel. A government that led with the policy of Hamas is an asset prior to October the 7th, that doesn't prioritise the lives of the hostages, is a government that doesn't serve the Israeli people but works for Qatar. And that is where we are now, in Israel itself. And I wanted to start with that, lest anybody was thinking of making the usual hackneyed, tired and increasingly offensive points about any criticism of what Benjamin Netanyahu's government has done being evidence of anything other than profound humanitarian concern. Because do you know what has annoyed people from the very start? Do you know what has annoyed precisely the people that man is talking about, precisely the people that are reluctant to admit that they're comfortable or they think it is acceptable for children to be killed, precisely the people that Yair Golan addresses there. They can't accept the idea that the death of a Jewish child is just as heartbreaking and just as wrong, morally, legally, ethically, as the death of a Palestinian or the death of an Arab child. And the idea that that can be offensive to anybody, the idea that that can be an invitation to unload abuse and insult is absolutely shocking. And I would say particularly perhaps for residents of a country or supporters of a country that was in many ways envisioned as a refuge from precisely that worldview. The idea of a human hierarchy, the idea of a human life being worth more or less than another, entirely as a consequence of an accident of birth. But we are where we are. And I wanted to begin with that because it is the words of a senior Israeli politician, echoed by many Israelis and many people who hold the importance of the existence of the modern state of Israel, as I do, but I'm not Jewish, so I don't have a cat in the fight, as it were, but on a personal level. Many people who are passionate, tireless supporters of the modern state of Israel will be agreeing with what Yair Golan has said there. And now I'll turn you to what David Lammy has done, speaking in the House of Commons. It felt almost as if a bottle had been uncorked, as if a dam had broken, and we may turn our attention shortly to the question of why now, but first you need to hear what he had to say.
Nearly all the hostages have been freed through negotiations, not military force. And that is why hostage families themselves and many other Israelis oppose this plan so strongly. Nor will this plan eliminate Hamas or make Israel secure. This war has left a generation orphaned and traumatized, ready for Hamas to recruit. As we learned in Northern Ireland, to defeat terrorists and their warped ideology, you cannot just rely on military might. You have to offer a viable political alternative opposing the expansion of the war that's killed thousands of children is not rewarding Hamas.
Although you will, of course, be accused of it, Mr. Lammy, one senses that he has decided he can live with that because, of course, some of the key characters in Netanyahu's administration are pretty hideous in their comments and their outlooks.
Netanyahu's government is planning to drive Gazans from their homes into a corner of the Strip to the south and permit them a fraction of the aid that they need. Yesterday, Minister Smodrik even spoke of Israeli forces cleansing Gaza. Destroying what's left of residents, Palestinians, being relocated, he said, to third countries. We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
And then the comment that I think will inform the question I will ask you. In fact, I should occasionally at least bend half a knee to the notion of this being a traditional phone-in programme and give you a quick heads up about what that question will be. How on earth did it come to this? From any perspective, but particularly from an Israeli perspective, how could any government go from having the sympathy and support of practically the entire world, even administrations and individuals that have historic problems with much of the conduct of the sort of Likud-flavoured element of Israeli society, the attack upon celebrating young people, the attack upon a music festival, the utterly bloody, murderous attack on October the 7th. How could anybody have gone from that place of almost unprecedented sympathy and support to international pariah? That will be my question. How did Benjamin Netanyahu end up leading not just Israel, but also many, many, many people, both there and sadly here, into the place so perfectly described by our Foreign Secretary?
Our message is clear. There is a UN plan ready to deliver aid at scale, needed with mitigations against aid diversion. There are brave humanitarians ready to do their jobs. There are over 9,000 trucks at the border. Prime Minister Netanyahu, end this blockade now and let the aid in. Regrettably, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite our efforts, this Israeli government's egregious actions and rhetoric have continued. They are isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people, and damaging the image of the State of Israel in the eyes of the world. I find this deeply painful as a lifelong friend of Israel and a believer in the values that were expressed in its Declaration of Independence. As the Prime Minister and fellow leaders said yesterday, we cannot stand by in the face of this new deterioration.
10:17 is the time. We will wait to see what they do, but already trade talks have been abandoned and sanctions are being talked about, including for some of the key members of both the administration and the hideous illegal settlement movement that doesn't receive anything like the levels of criticism from UK media that it should do. Haaretz, which is a kind of liberal media outlet in Israel itself, has published an editorial under the title "The Uncomfortable Truth. Yair Golan is right about what Israel is becoming." And he is, and so is David Lammy. Already you will have Golan himself, the Israeli Jewish politician, being accused of anti-Semitism by members of Netanyahu's busted flush of a government. One former minister warning that he will, quote, certainly add fuel to the fire of anti-Semitism, trying once again to conflate criticism of murdering children with somehow historic hatred of Jews, something that happens on a scale that is almost unbelievable. given the popularity, if you prefer, of the position. The defence minister has accused Golan himself of a vile blood libel. So perhaps I was being a bit optimistic when I said that citing the interventions of a Jewish Israeli politician would somehow defuse the ludicrous accusations of anti-Semitism and vile blood libel that often accompany criticisms of starving an entire nation or murdering children. They have called for him to be ostracised from public life. So, I mean, anybody who considers themselves to be anti-woke is going to be furious about that call for cancellation and cessation of freedom of speech. And one minister, someone called Shlomo Karhi, who you may not have come across so far, called the lawmaker a terrorist. Justice Minister Yair Levin, the architect of the government coup, according to Haaretz, called for him to be stripped of his rank of Major General because he is not only a politician, he's also a patriot and a military hero. So I don't think this is a question with obvious answers, partly because we've never pinpointed precisely where the pivot took place. Remember that question that we happened upon together very early and I never really got away from again, which was how much will be too much? How much will be too much? How much response will be too much response? What will be disproportionate? How many deaths will be too many deaths as retaliation or revenge for the attacks of October the 7th? And I still don't know when that point was reached, but goodness me, it's been crossed now. So how did Israel manage to go from a place of unprecedented international public sympathy to uncontested international pariah status, starving children, and as Yair Golan has pointed out quite powerfully, starving children and celebrating it? How has that managed to happen?